The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the BBO ESF support webinar on participant eligibility. For those who don't know me, I'm Kate Hayward from Ecoris UK, and I work on the BBO ESF support contract, which the Big Lottery Fund have put in place to provide specific support in handling the requirements of ESF. Ecoris is largely responsible for developing support materials, which you'll find on our webinar, which is here, bboesfsupport.com. If you miss anything this morning, please go to the website where you can view a recording of the webinar probably sometime early next week. You can also view our other webinars, which are on document retention, actual costs, cross-cutting themes, and evaluation if you click through to resources and then webinars. Those of you who are familiar with webinars already will know that you can contribute comments and questions via the chat facility, which you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen. If I can, I'll answer questions live, but I'm not the world's best multitasker, so forgive me if I don't. Either way, we'll include your question in a sheet of Q&As alongside the webinar on the website. Unlike previous webinars we've held, we have explicitly suggested this time that lead partners invite staff from delivery organisations to join the webinar if they wish. This is primarily because delivery partners will often be the first in the line to check participant eligibility, and they'll be responsible for recording evidence most often. Participant eligibility is also an area where inconsistencies between partners can cause quite significant issues. So we thought, therefore, that it might be helpful to just explain key requirements in more detail for everybody and think particularly about how they can be managed in practice. So I'm going to just launch the first poll to ask you what your status is in a partnership. So hopefully this is a fairly straightforward question. Just to find out how many of you are the leads, therefore hold ultimate responsibility for all the eligibility, and how many of you are representatives of delivery organisations. Okay, so we've got roughly a quarter of the people taking part in this webinar being delivery partners, and 3/4 are leads. So I'm going to talk today about essential eligibility criteria, which is specifically the criteria that determines whether a potential participant can be funded under BBO. So I'm not going to talk about defining the various different groups of people you may have as targets within your project, which is a slightly different subject. And I'm not going to try and cover today evidencing of results, though that may well warrant being a subject of a later webinar. So I'm going to start with one of the most important definitions that you should be aware of, around the definition of unemployed people and economically inactive people. What I would like to stress is that benefits are not relevant to eligibility. There's been some confusion on this point, and I think perhaps in past programs there was a more clear link to using benefits to actually determine eligibility. But on this program, you should not consider benefits in terms of eligibility. Benefits don't all align perfectly to allow you to determine if somebody's either unemployed or economically inactive. The definition you must be using is that somebody should be judged to be unemployed if they're job seeking and available for work, or they should be determined to be economically inactive if they are not job seeking and or not available for work. So one question that was recently asked is how ESA support, an ESA work-related activity group, might potentially align to the definitions of unemployed and economically inactive. So this perfectly exemplifies the position, because in fact individuals in both groups might be seeking work, though neither are required to as a condition of their benefits. So you might, if you're using the benefits to determine their eligibility, assume that they're economically inactive because of the benefit they're on, but if they happen to be looking for a job, that would be wrong. Obviously, up until now, you could straightforwardly class all recipients of JSA as unemployed, as they are required to seek work as a condition of receiving their benefit. However, as people are being moved to universal credit, this is going to become much less clear. So again, the only way to determine which status is correct is by finding out whether the individual concerned is seeking work or not. That said, benefits might be used as supporting evidence of eligibility depending on circumstances. So you should be asking whether a potential participant is in receipt of benefits, as it will probably help you to understand their employment situation and their needs. And another reason for doing that is to make sure that they understand they should discuss with their benefits advisor whether participation in the project has any implications for the conditions of their benefit. So ESF follows the ONS definition of employment status, which is given here in full. So a person is defined as being unemployed if they're without a job, want a job, have actively sought work in the last 4 weeks, and are able to start work within the next 2 weeks. I'm going to jump down to the definition of economically inactive. So a person is defined as being economically inactive if they're neither employed or unemployed, including those who want a job but have not been seeking work in the last 4 weeks, those who want a job and are seeking work but not available to start work within the next 2 weeks, and those who do not want a job. Someone's defined as employed if they're in paid employment at work, self-employed for at least 1 hour over the reference week, or temporarily not at work during that reference week, but have a formal attachment to their job. I should say that DWP doesn't specifically require you to use the reference week approach to deciding if someone's employed or not. but the BBO guidance does state that someone working even 1 hour a week would be ineligible. Usually a question about the previous week would be enough to ascertain this. However, if someone's worked very irregularly in recent times, you may need to find out if what you're calling the reference week is normal for them, to be sure that they couldn't still be judged as employed if they may have worked several hours in the previous week, say. Likewise, if somebody might simply be on leave, it wouldn't be enough to ask purely about the previous week. People on 0 hours contracts aren't eligible to take part in BBO, irrespective of how little work they might have received from them. Just a quick note on age. Here again, there's been a little bit of confusion about the lower limit of age eligibility. So basically, it's given very clearly in the ESF national eligibility rules, if you want to have a look, that 15-year-olds are eligible for ESF only if it is being used to prevent them becoming NEET. So whereas older individuals can be NEET or indeed employed or unemployed, 15-year-olds are legally obliged to still be in education. So it would only be if they were at risk of becoming NEET that they could take part in ESF. There is no upper age limit to ESF, though again the national eligibility rules give an expectation that all participants will sooner or later contribute to the economy by moving into employment. So you should try to document that intention for those who are nearing retirement age and set appropriate goals for them. You should in general be aware that the suitability of a project for a specific participant is actually also an essential ESF eligibility criterion, which means that auditors might query not only the right to work and employment status of individuals, but the appropriateness of the project for individuals in light of their circumstances. So one example of that on BBO might be that full-time university students, though not being technically ineligible, are unlikely to be appropriate participants for most of the project outlines. Moving on to evidencing of eligibility criteria, a document appeared on the ESF webpage at the end of May called ESF Data Evidence Requirements, Eligibility and Results. It's very helpful and clear, and in fact I've based most of the content of this webinar on it. In it there is a fairly unambiguous directive quoted from the Commission to the England ESF Managing Authority, which says that self-declaration is inadequate for so-called essential eligibility criteria, which for BBO are the criteria of being unemployed or economically inactive and having the right to work in the UK. By contrast, interestingly, there's also a directive that other characteristics, some of which may be target groups for your project and some of which may even be qualifying eligibility criteria, need not be evidenced other than through your self-declaration. So that includes disabilities, for example, work-limiting conditions, homelessness, being an ex-offender and other things. None of those should be needing third-party evidence to demonstrate eligibility. So this is why I'm focusing today on essential eligibility, because it needs to be treated rather differently procedurally to other characteristics. So some questions that you should be asking about your project procedures. It's not the job of participants to prove their eligibility, but the responsibility of project staff to check their documents and let participants know if more is required. It's clear that the onerous task of filling in all the various forms and bringing in paperwork often requires a degree of relationship building before it can be approached with potential participants or participants. And a number of projects have said that they won't expect to receive evidence of eligibility even within the first few sessions. The DWP recommend, not surprisingly, obtaining eligibility evidence at the point of enrolment. And costs of supporting a participant can't be claimed until evidence of eligibility is in place. So there's clearly a risk to supporting participants through a number of sessions before checks are carried out. So first and foremost, you must have controls to make sure you hold back costs from your claims until you have and have checked the necessary evidence of eligibility. If you do decide to carry out checks after costs have already been incurred, you should be clear within your partnership who will be liable for costs if the participant turns out to be ineligible. So a question's been asked, if participants don't have a passport or birth certificate to demonstrate right to work, we've said that it's okay for the project to fund the expense of getting documents. They understand that if, when registering someone for the project, they're not eligible, they would not be able to pay for the documents. However, if these costs are funded and then the participant's eligible but doesn't engage any further, would these costs become ineligible? The answer to that's probably no, but in order to would want to understand the reasons for the disengagement to make sure that there was no fraudulent undertaking to attend the project in the first place. So if, for example, there was a pattern of disengagements after receiving documents that have been paid for, this might potentially result in recovery of funds. The Data Evidence Requirements document is particularly helpful in setting out a hierarchy of evidence checks to follow for participant eligibility. The current participant eligibility form, that's one of the annexes to the Guide to European Funding from the Big Lottery Fund, doesn't take account of this hierarchy of evidence checks. So you should refer directly to the Data Evidence Requirements documents when you're planning your project procedures. I'm just going to explain that briefly here. So this is the hierarchy, broadly speaking, as laid out in that document. I have amended it slightly to try and make it clearer. So the first tier in terms of evidence is what they call their lists of preferred evidence. The second tier would be things that have come from a third party specifically for that participant, so letters to confirm eligibility status or referrals. The third tier is called credible alternative evidence, and the fourth tier would be having no evidence and deciding whether to make an exception. I'll talk more in a moment about what this all actually means in terms of right to work and being unemployed or economically inactive. Projects must always request preferred evidence in the first instance. The lower tiers of the hierarchy must not come ahead of preferred evidence for reasons of convenience or simplicity, and auditors will be alert to any sign that the project's not following the hierarchy. So, for example, by comparing practices against comparable projects. It's very important to say that this hierarchy does not mean that more potential participants should be turned away than if self-declaration were the preferred evidence. It does mean, though, that the judgment on eligibility must be made and documented on information and documents presented by the potential participants and the reasons given for not having stronger evidence. So ESF support should only still be refused when project staff are not actually convinced that an individual is eligible or that they don't have good reasons for not having stronger evidence. So looking now at the tiers in relation to each of right to work and employment status. So the first tier of the right to work hierarchy, which is the preferred documents that you should be asking for in the first instance, is it's actually less stringent than employers follow when checking right to work. It actually seems relatively lenient for those of you who might remember in the last programme that full birth certificates had to be provided and that an NI number would only suffice in combination with another document. The second tier, where a referral or a written confirmation is acceptable, this has been asked by a number of people, whether or not if an individual has come from, say, Job Centre Plus, they would be able to eligibility. So the answer to that probably is yes, provided that you have asked first for preferred evidence, and there's a good reason that people haven't got it. So the referrer needs to provide a written statement. It must be signed, dated, and at the least contain the name of the participant, the name of the project preferably, and state explicitly the eligibility criteria that's being confirmed, e.g. the right to work or employment status. So people have asked whether or not there could be a simple form drawn up with standard wording. So the answer to that is yes, but it needs to be tailored so that it contains these particular points. So looking at preferred evidence for to demonstrate that individuals are not in work, the first tier would be DWP or Job Centre Plus decision notification letter, new claims award, or change of circumstances decision letter. So what you'll notice from that is that first tier documents will generally not be possible to obtain for people who are economically inactive. At the moment, the Big Lottery Fund are negotiating with DWP for acceptance of self-declaration for people who are economically inactive. But for the time being, you will still need to seek written confirmation, i.e. the second tier, the other first tier option, which is written confirmation or referral from, I'll start again. For economically inactive people, only the second tier documents are likely to be applicable, and it is that you should be using until such time as Big Lottery Fund are able to confirm that self-declaration is acceptable. The BBO guidance suggests that other benefits, such as incapacity allowance, would be suitable evidence of economic inactivity, but actually the ESF data evidence requirements document doesn't support this. So for the time being, you should follow straightforwardly the second tier confirmation from third party evidence for people who are economically inactive. So alternative documents being the third and fourth tiers, which apply to right to work and to demonstrate that people are not in work. So examples for both of these are likely to be documents that almost fulfill the preferred evidence requirement, but not quite. So they might be documents which don't fully identify the individual, documents that are more than 12 months old, and so on, or letters from a statutory authority, that don't fully state explicitly the eligibility requirement you're looking for, but could be taken to be credible. So as for the second tier, there still needs to be plausible documented reasons for not obtaining stronger evidence, as well as an explanation provided as to why the alternative evidence is taken to be credible. If in fact you consider it to be sufficiently strong, you should inform the Big Lottery Fund so that the evidence could be potentially added to the preferred list for either right to work or demonstrating that individuals are not in work. So the fourth tier is taking self-declaration purely. And this is where you should consider whether an exception to the evidence requirement can be justified. So if so, you must document, again, the reasons why a participant doesn't have any evidence, the attempt to collect the required evidence, and how you have been satisfied with the reasons provided by the participant. So the emphasis is very much on proving the case for the exception rather than on the strength of a self-declaration. So that's a really important point to bear in mind for the whole of this hierarchy arrangement. So I'm going to talk a little bit about holding copies now, and I'd like to launch a poll just to ask you a couple of quick questions. You can opt for one, both, or none of these if they apply or not. Okay, still a few changes. Okay, I think we're there. Oh, interesting. Okay, so 65% are intending to keep eligibility evidence only as electronic copies, and 45% are intending to use mobile technology to copy eligibility documents. The DWP's preferred approach is to keep actual copies of documentation, including eligibility evidence. So to be clear, this means that their preferred approach is for you to take a photocopy or scan of things like passports and so on. Quite clearly, that means that data protection and security practices might need to be tightened up because you will be retaining personal identity documents. A question has been raised as to whether or not a tablet or camera phone could be used to copy original documents, as the project worker might not have photocopy facilities when doing outreach work. I can't find any reason for that to be disallowed, but it does potentially pose an even higher degree of data protection challenges. So if the project does want to pursue this, as 45% if you would like to, I would strongly recommend that you look into improving the security of devices in any way possible and make a point of saving images to more secure servers at the office on a daily basis and wiping them from the mobile devices as soon as possible too. I'm not a data protection expert, but I'd recommend that you look into that. When it comes to certification, that's a relatively straightforward declaration with wordings given in the ESF guidance on document retention that you can find on the ESF webpage. One point that I wanted to make is that certification should be taking place in sight of the copy and the original. This means that where you have procedures where you're, for example, scanning in an original and uploading it unseen, or certifying by someone other than the person who saw the original, or certifying a copy at a later date, you need to think about how you are going to be providing adequate certification that the copy is a true copy of the original. The most straightforward way, unfortunately, probably is still the old-fashioned way of getting a stamp made up with a declaration, printing a photocopy, stamping it and signing the certification straight away. If you're going to be maintaining an electronic copy only, the project will need to work out a method of attaching an electronic certification. I understand many PDF viewers, such as Adobe Acrobat, permit you to add a note and electronic signature. Alternatively, it may be sufficient to email a confirmation to your administrator with the copy as an attachment, but as this is likely to be a security issue again, unless you have some kind of secure file transfer system, you'll need to look into that quite carefully. I'll apologise for not having solved this issue. It's a technical issue, really. I'd be very grateful for anyone exploring these issues to get in touch and let me know what you found. I just wanted to list out the source documents that I've used for today's webinar. So the eligibility rules, the 2014-20 European Social Fund, set out most clearly the eligibility in terms of age and so on. The output and result indicator definitions guidance is very useful, although rather laborious. It gives very clear categories for unemployed and economically inactive, and describes how that would apply to people with different kinds of leave arrangements and different kinds of employment statuses. The ESF data evidence requirements I've referred to throughout this webinar, and I thoroughly recommend that you read that in full because it gives tables of preferred evidence and the hierarchy that I've just briefly outlined here. And the guidance on document retention also is useful to read, having determined how you're going to approach keeping copies of eligibility evidence. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Please give feedback. I will be putting the slides and my notes on our website so that you can read this through again, share it with partners as you wish, and so on. And get in touch if you've got anything specific to ask. I see there have been some questions that have come in, but I think I will probably be best off taking those away and putting a document on our website later with questions and answers on it. Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye.